All right, sweet. Man, we're excited today, dude. We got an upgrade from the Kimbrell family. A couple months ago, we
Mm.
had this guy named Nathan Kimbrell talking about
Oh,
multiplication, and so now we've upgraded to the big brother, Stephen Kimbrell. And if you don't know Stephen, Chris, Ashley, if you've never met Stephen before, this is Stephen Kimbrell.
Yeah.
nice to meet you guys.
But Fonny, Stephen is man, he's a church planner in Irvine, California, Grace City Church. Really, man, one of the first church planners that I ever connected with when I started this role at Peace. And he's turned into a good friend. And I wanted him to talk about leadership development because, like, I mean, honestly, Chris and Ashley are living proof of it. So, Stephen invested into Amos. You know Amos, funny.
Yeah.
Amos was there on staff with Stephen at Grace City Church. Um, and Stephen poured into Amos, helped raise him up to go and plant City Lights Church in Chula Vista. And now Chris and Ashley connected with Amos, and they've been training under Amos's leadership and Stephen's leadership with a group he helped start a group called Plant California. Their vision is to plant 10 churches in the state of California. And Chris and Ashley are those first church planters with that. So we're seeing products on this call of Stephen's leadership. And so man, so Stephen, I'm gonna turn it over to you and let you just kind of lead us through this and have some Q&A time and all that with these guys.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, good to see you guys. Glad to know
Hey.
that half the class heard I was coming, so they didn't show up. So that's awesome. No, just kidding. It's good to be here. Good to talk to you guys. Love what everybody's doing and excited for all the next steps that you guys have to take. And there's, when you're planning a church, I mean, you guys are already feeling this. Feels like there's 800,000 steps to take. And then after that, it's like, oh, you've got a few more. And but leadership and leadership development is part of it. And I'm definitely not I don't feel like I'm the guru by any means on this. I feel like we've learned a lot over the last 9 years through a lot of coaching from other wise leaders and mentors, and then sometimes just making mistakes, which we're all going to do. But hopefully I can add some things of value that will keep you from some mistakes maybe that we've made or that I've seen some other people make. Um, and so I'm gonna go through, assuming that everybody has the book you guys are going through on leadership, right? Which I mean, man, love that. You said they were short chapters, like super short, like just get to the point. That was great. So I'm gonna start walking through, it's chapter 7 through 11, right, Brad? Okay.
Yeah, basically, we jumped through like the first half of it, and then because it kind of
Okay.
yeah, something wouldn't be perfect.
Okay. I'm gonna walk through some of that, and then I may throw in some, points or stories along the way. And if if you've got a question along the way that pops up, don't feel like you have to wait until I'm done talking to bring it up. I'd love for today to be conversational. I know the the last thing that I like is when I'm in a meeting with someone and they talk about everything except for what I've got questions about. So if there's things that you have questions about, when it comes to leadership and leadership development, pipeline multiplication, all that kind of stuff, throw it out there and we'll talk about it, because probably somebody else in the group has a question about it too. So that would be great. But just to get us a starting point, I'll start us off with chapter 7, and he's talking about coaching. And I think he mentions this. If not, I'll throw it in there. I like how, the point with coaching is you have to be, there has to be a mutual understanding that coaching is taking place. It's hard to coach someone that doesn't know they're being coached or doesn't want to be coached. So I think that's a prerequisite. I've talked to people. I've had the frustration before where you have someone that's like, man, they would be a great leader. I'd love to like help shape them or coach them. I see so much potential there, but they don't want it and they don't have time for it. They're not interested. Then it's just a non-starter and it hurts and it stinks because you see the potential, but they have to have that desire and interest in being coached and humility to be coached. So I think that's important. But he gets in quickly into the importance of the relationship, and I think all of you probably know this already, but I mean, relationship is king, and that relationship is going to be the foundation for the coaching, for the leadership development. I just think it's so hard to lead people somewhere to develop them into something if you're not having a relationship outside of like that classroom formal type setting. I think there's places for that formal setting, but that relationship is that's going to give you the ability to really lean into them, for them to trust you because they've got a relationship with you. They've seen you lead. They've been with you in other circumstances. I mean, we all know that's how Jesus led. He invited the disciples to be a part of his life. He didn't just enter into a classroom setting with them. So I think anything you can do to build relationship with someone that you're mentoring or coaching into leadership is helpful. And whatever that looks like, if it's golfing together, if it's grabbing lunch or checking in on them with how their kids are doing, all of those things that we do to build relationships are so vital to any kind of coaching. And then he talks about some practical steps with intentionality in coaching. I think this is key. I think my personality, when we started out, I leaned more into the relationship side, and then like, hey, you'll pick it up along the way. Where I think now I've learned a little more to be intentional and upfront with defining some goals, and finding out, like he mentions, what are your goals that you want to learn in this process, and don't assume that you know all of their goals. But I think getting expectations out front is huge. He mentions the number one thing that kills coaching is unmet expectations. And that's so true. So it's going to take time on your part to set out the expectations that you have for them, but also to sit down and say, what are some expectations you have from me? Because I mean, sometimes you may have someone who, I mean, they think you're going to let them live with you, for the next 3 months, and you're like, whoa, 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 this is not the expectation. Um, and you may have some expectations for them they're not ready for. So having those up front, I think he mentions that super important. The power of listening, find out what their expectations are. Great, solid chapter. Chapter 8 is
Hey,
where he
hey,
talks
what
about.
we're talking about, sorry, I'm going to
Yep.
interrupt you because you said we could. So just from your perspective, you are kind of same timeline as like Fonnie is. I think their church is a little over 6 years old. Grace City's 7 or 8, 9. How old are you guys?
8, yeah.
Yeah. So, what was the most beneficial aspect of coaching for you when you were at the 7 years ago mark with Grace City coming in?
Me getting coaching or me coaching others?
You getting coaching and then how that maybe affected how you coached others.
Yeah. Man, I'm a believer. I believe, honestly, I'm to the point now, I believe you should always have a coach. And that coach can change in different seasons, and it can be a coach in different areas. I have a guy right now who is my coach, and he's coaching me right now on leadership development, because it's something we need to go to the next level in our church. So we're in the middle of revamping a lot of the things that we do. And he's helping me with that because that's kind of his area of expertise. So I think at every area along the way, um, I I would have a coach. I mean, I think the best the best athletes in the world, if it's LeBron James today, LeBron James is the best right now and one of the best all time, but he still has not just a head basketball coach, but he has multiple coaches and trainers who are trying to improve him in different areas. And I just think that's smart. I think as pastors, as leaders, sometimes I don't know, sometimes I think maybe we're arrogant to think that we don't need it or we've gotten to a certain level. I just think you always need it, because it helps me with, you asked how it helps me. It helps me with blind spots. Um, it helps me. Like I mentioned, I lean more towards the relational side and okay, you'll pick this up as we go versus let me put all these things in writing for you. Let me give you a job description. Let me write down expectations up front. And that's one of the things my coach is helping me with right now and going, okay, do you have that down on paper? Have they seen that? Have you been over that with them? And then are you going back later, a month later, and reviewing, okay, how did they do? Are you debriefing? Those are the things, like for me, it's helping with blind spots. And it's holding me accountable to getting the work done that I actually want to do. And then I turn around and coach other people that same way. So yeah, good question. Any others that come to mind on the kind of the subject of coaching before we move on to the next chapter? Okay, so the next chapter he talks about creating a plan, and it's the idea of the from the line to the pipeline. Explain it's the concept of viewing leadership development as a pipeline rather than just this process, and having incremental steps uh, for people to go through. Now, I think that's important, whether you actually like have that displayed or not. I don't think matters, but I think having a process and a plan where people can go, so that it's not just they have to jump from new believer to they're leading, they're a ministry leader. Obviously, that's not going to be sustainable, and that's going to set them up for failure. So I think having that linear or that chart of different places along the way where people can grow and people can develop. Just for instance, like he gives, I think the example of small group attendee, and then eventually small group leader, and then maybe a coach over or director over a number of small groups. Those kind of things are a natural progression through kind of the small group ministry, and kind of having those different areas where people can be in and can grow and develop at a healthy pace is important. I think it's a good spot for me to just kind of throw in a few things right here that may not be in the book, but that I've seen, that maybe I've done or I've seen others do, that um, I think hurt that process, or rush it too much. And I'll throw out just a couple of, I think, red flag warnings about putting people into leadership. And I think the first one is you have to be really, really slow and meticulous about putting people in leadership. Um, Sometimes as pastors, maybe we do that because we believe in grace, right? So let's give them grace. Let's give them a chance. We 100% believe in grace, but grace and leadership are two very, very, very different things. And so when it comes to a leadership position, I would be very, very, very slow to give away leadership, because once you give it to a person, it's very hard to take it back. Um, you want to really observe that person. You want to, I believe in, to whom much is given, much is required. I believe that's a principle in scripture. I also believe, I love the statement that, I said 11, I lost it. Where Jesus was saying, if you're faithful in little, you'll also be faithful with much. So I think, watching someone for a long period of time before you're putting them into leadership, I think is incredibly important. I've seen that happen where someone just really, I think I need someone, to be over this area, or to lead a small group, or to lead kids ministry, or whatever it is, or a hospitality team. Can you do that? And man, it could go off the rails really, really quickly. So I would say be slow to do that. The second thing I would say is when you're looking for that person, and I think you guys may have talked about this earlier in the book. Another thing I've seen sometimes happen is people will choose the expert to be the leader, and those two things sometimes are very, very different. And what I mean by that is um, they'll find someone who is knowledgeable in a certain area. So let's say a guy like he really knows the Bible really, really well. Um, I'm thinking of a guy in our church right now who's more educated, much more educated than I am, in the scriptures. Um, he knows the Bible very, very well. It'd be tempted for someone to go, okay, you know the Bible well. I want you to be over our small groups. I know him being over small groups would be a disaster because he is an expert when it comes to the scriptures, but he's not a leader. Does that make sense? And those are two very, 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 very different things. Being an expert in something and being a leader. I would rather a person who didn't know the scriptures very well, but had leadership ability, leadership gifting be over small groups and let that person be a consultant. That would be a better relationship because when you put someone in a position of leadership that doesn't they don't have good relational skills or they don't manage people well, they can't grow something. If they can't grow it, if they can't move the ball down the field, then you're going to have problems down the road. So I would say that's something that I see take place. The last thing I'll mention on that is if someone's not emotionally stable, you don't want them as a leader. They may come to you and say, "Hey, I really I really want to lead this." Which is a red flag if someone comes and they really, really want to lead something usually. But if they come and they want to lead it, they're available, they're excited about it. But you also notice that they're emotionally unstable, meaning they can have anger outbursts. Um, they can just go through seasons where they just kind of disappear. If they're unstable, they can be a great addition to a team. They can be a part of a team, but when they're leading anything, they're going to bring the instability to what they lead. Does that make sense? Um, so I want to pause there because I threw out a few things, and I don't know if anybody has a question about um, a specific instance or anything that you're thinking of, but I think I've just seen this be a stumbling block a lot of times, and it's important enough to just stop and hone in on a little bit. So I don't know if any questions come to mind.
We had a situation like you said in City Light in Romania. So I had a girl who was a leader, and she was very good, and passionate about it, but she had some issues like you said, Sometimes she was feeling guilty that the small groups is not working, not the small group. She was involved with prayer department, so she felt a lot of guilt, uh, and we decided that she cannot be a leader because we felt a lot of pressure with her. So how would you deal with somebody like this, maybe you don't know in the first in the first of ministry of their ministry that they have some issues. You name them, be a leader, and but how would you go with something like this?
Hmm.
How do you discuss with them? How will you say,
Yeah.
hey, that's it, let's have a break, or I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to answer it in two ways. I'm going to get to answering the question. The first part is just another way to like before you put someone in leadership. And I know it's hard because I mean, none of us are going to get 100%, right? But I think the more of a timeline we give ourselves to see a person in action, the better chance we have of getting it right. The more insight we get from other people, other leaders. What's asking, you've seen them. What have you seen? What's your experience been like with them? Um, and then before they're given a permanent position, give them leadership over something that's smaller and time based. So, for instance, let's just take the prayer thing. So if we could, go back and maybe you did all this, but with prayer, okay, so before she gets the label of leading the prayer ministry, maybe there's a prayer night. And so she's going to be over the prayer night, or maybe there's a 2 week emphasis on prayer and she's going to lead that. That's what I think is really good to do. Give someone a test first and see how did that go. And if it goes terrible, then we know, okay, we're not going to do that. So I think those are some good ways to kind of mitigate the risk. But then, yeah, getting to the situation, okay, well, now we're in a spot where we have we have someone in place and we've realized they're not the right one. Or sometimes maybe they were in the beginning and situations changed, their life changed, or their heart changed, and all of a sudden they're just not in anymore. It's always messy, you know. It's always messy. I I think the 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 best thing to do is to go ahead and we usually think if we wait a little bit, maybe it'll get better. Um, Problems don't usually correct themselves with time. They just usually get worse with time. So I think as soon as you can address it directly with the person, if it's a consistent behavior, then you address the behavior. And then if the behavior doesn't change, then it's a removal of the person. And I think that's just a really, he talks about it later on here. It's a direct a direct conversation. And it may be you and a couple other leaders. And the best case scenario sometimes is if they'll say, I just don't think this is for me right now in that conversation, and they'll kind of quit themselves. But if not, it's just, yeah, you have to say, hey, look, this isn't working. So you probably already knew that. Those are the gut wrenching, not easy conversations that, you're like, man, I got into this to be a pastor and preach the word, not have these conversations. But um, I, this has helped my opinion of it. For so long, I felt like, and I felt bad for doing that, but I realized God's called me to be the shepherd of the flock. And sometimes as the shepherd, I'm defending the flock from the pain that other people are causing through their leadership. And I have to, not in malice or anger, but I have to do what's best for the entirety of the flock. That's not easy though. Any other? I'm going to move to a different area real quick, guys. I think some people are setting up right here.
Yeah, you're good. Is that your office, Stephen?
Yeah, it's like a little outside courtyard. There's the building my office is in right there.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a public
Yeah.
uh
And that's where you
space.
moved from where that initial office was, right?
Yeah, yeah, the old one. Okay, here we go. Let's try this. Okay, so I'm just going to keep rolling through. Um, okay, creating a plan, chapter 9, 4 questions. I think these are super helpful. The questions for coaching people. And I think you can use these in all different kinds of settings. But I think that's one of the things I'm starting to learn. I'm a slow learner, but uh, a lot of coaching is asking the right questions versus just giving the right answers. Because people they need to come to the conclusion themselves. And I think you can guide that conversation, but helping people think through stuff is fantastic. And he gives those key questions. Where are you now? Helping them evaluate where they are in their ministry, where they are as a leader, and like you mentioned, some people, it's good for you to hear where they think they are, because you're going to have people that are leading teams that they think they are doing a terrible job. They think they are way in over their head, and you're looking at them going, I think they're killing it, and they're going to need encouragement from you. And there are going to be other people who think they're absolutely killing it, and that they're not. And so that's a good evaluation question. Why are you there? So if they're in a great position in their ministry, or if it's struggling, um, getting them to evaluate why, what got them into that situation, super helpful. Where is God taking you? Such a good, I mean, a vision question, which I think we know a huge part of leadership. I would say the biggest part of leadership is vision. Where And they don't have to be able to articulate a beautiful, crafted vision, but just where are you going? Like, what do you feel like, next is next for this ministry? Where do you see it in a year? Where do you see it in 2 years? What would you like it to look like at that point in time? Those kind of things, getting them to think through vision is great. And then what is your next step? So good, because it takes vision from out of the clouds to, okay, that's great, but what what's next? Like, what's the small next thing? We don't have to figure out how we're getting from here to, you know 5 years from now, but just over these next 90 days, what do you think is the next thing? um and I love the practicality of that. So just a good practical section there on coaching, questions to ask. I'm going to go ahead and go to chapter 10. Brad, stop me if I'm missing something. Or
No, I don't know. No. I would love to hear maybe from each of them at this point. I think about what you said. I think all of them have, developed a vision of what they see. I'm curious as where they're all at right now, what they feel like their next step is currently. Where you're at in the process, what do you feel like is the next step that you need to take, whether it's, Fonnie at City Light, or Adam, considering becoming the pastor of the church, or the altar church about to take off, you're about to go all in, with the altar San Diego. So what do you guys feel like right now is what is that next step for you? So you can kind of talk about where you're at right now and what you feel like that next step is for you.
Let me tell you very quick, because for us, it's very simple. We don't have such a I don't know set up mind like you guys. So we are in the 7th year of City Life Romania. So our next step is to find a new location, because we are a little bit crowded and we don't have parking place for cars for people. So we are looking for the next steps, maybe to move in another location. So yeah, that's simple and quick.
All right, for us, we're just finishing a very busy season of residency and raising the funds necessary to be in San Diego. So we're actually still doing that and trying to balance also being very community oriented and being well known within our community, serving our community, and making sure that people know who we are on an individual basis and building and developing really strong relationships with people. And so we're doing all of that at once. And then, so right now our goal is to finish our fundraising, and our next big goal is to start a small gathering, so a Bible study of the people that we've developed relationships with. And man, I think if everybody who's interested and wants to come, we'd probably have somewhere around 15 or so people, not even including our team, that will be coming sporadically through the summer. So, and then our next step with that is our desire is to build that group, including our team members that are coming, into a group of 35, which will be our launch team. But when I say development, I mean developing them into people that are who desire and are capable of discipling another person. So people who have said yes to Jesus and who are willing to take that next step in the discipleship process, as calling somebody else to know who Jesus is, and then helping them to learn and grow in their faith. So, and we believe that that's how we'll grow to the 35 people. And then when those 35 people are equipped, that's how we'll launch and hopefully have 105 people. We're not shooting for the 800 or 1,000 on launch day. We want 105 people that aren't guests visiting from other churches. I think that's that's an important thing. Um, and then yeah, just continue that process over and over again.
Yes, for me, first, sorry for coming late. I had some technical problems. But then for me, next steps are actually we're trying to think of currently at the hub way how to uh, make a process of continual and good process of making new leaders, developing leaders. So reading this book was cool, and that so this is the next step, creating this process, and also finding some financial stability or options to grow and not be limited by the current state.
Awesome. Yeah, thank y'all for just sharing that. Steve, anything you want to add there on next steps, or you want to jump on into chapter 10?
Yeah, let's go ahead to chapter 10. He talks about developing the whole leader. And with that, just the head, the heart, the hands. And I think, I mean, obviously that's super important. I think maybe you can get away with not developing the whole leader in other settings, but definitely not in a church setting. And I think that's one of the things, again, that makes taking your time and putting a leader in place so important in a church, because you do need, they don't have to be perfect in all those areas, but you do need all those areas functioning well. And so taking the time to invest in them, in their head, they have to be trained to do the job. I mean, that's important. Whatever that job is, they have to be trained to do that well in the church. But then also their heart has to be molded, right? Like, we're trying to not just create, arrogant, capable leaders. We're trying to create humble, capable leaders. And so making sure we're spending the time to craft their heart and lead them into that, I think is super important. The last chapter is the one I want to get to, and then it kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier. Uh, can you guys hear the music that's playing right here? Okay, perfect. My computer's filled. This group's doing a catering and they just came in, they turned the music up. So I feel like I need to talk really loud, but that's probably not the case. Um, so but the conversations, he uh talks about having fierce conversations. This goes back to that hard part that we were talking about. Um, and there's just no way around it. The longer we go in leadership and the bigger our churches get and the more impactful our churches get, the more difficult conversations we're going to have. That's just it's just a part of it because it's just a numbers game. There's more people, right? And Craig Rochelle, one of the things he writes about leadership a lot, and um, one of the things he talks about is they asked him, what do you think is the most important quality of a leader? And he said, a high pain tolerance. And I would 100% agree with that. There's a lot of other things that make a great leader, but that tolerance for pain and not just enduring pain, but even sometimes entering into it, that you know is going to be a painful conversation, a difficult conversation. Man, it's not easy, right? Like it's not easy to look at a situation, say, I know I need to say something. I know I need to address this, but I don't know how they're going to take it. Um, man, that's so hard. But I've seen that the more difficult, the more worried I am about the conversation, usually is an indicator of how much I need to have it. And also usually is an indicator of how impactful that conversation is going to be. One that comes to mind is not necessarily a leadership conversation, but one I had maybe 6 months ago. The guy in our church, I'll tell you guys this story because I don't think anybody knows this individual, and it's just it's a weird story. But it was a conversation we had to have. Um, so it came to my attention. Somebody in our church said to me, "Hey, did you know that?" And they named this guy has a photography business. And I was like, "Well, I knew he did photography, but I didn't. I mean, I don't know anything about his business." And he was like, "Okay." And he says, "Did you know it's a boudoir photography business?" And I'm not sure if everybody's up on what boudoir photography is, but it's basically where somebody would take pictures of a woman with little to no clothes on, um, and she would then give those pictures to her husband. That's the concept, right? So there's a guy in our church who's doing that, and I was like, "What?" And they said, "Well, there's a website you can go look at if you want." I'm like, "Well, I don't think I need to go see the website," um, but I had my wife go see the website, and she was like, "Oh, it's legit. Like it's, little to no clothing, and sometimes no clothing." And and the crazy thing was on the guy's website, like he's got Bible verses all over it. And he was using Bible verses to talk about like showing, the beauty of these women that God had created. And he was talking about how this has been such a gift to so many marriages and strengthened their marriages. And it was nuts. It was absolutely nuts. Um, a really, really uncomfortable conversation to have, right? And so I I reached out to him, asked him if we could talk, um, presented my case. It went okay initially. We had a second conversation with me and a leader, an elder in our church, and that one went much better. Anyway, it was so awkward. Did not want to have the conversation. I thought he's going to get mad. He's going to leave. He's going to whatever. Long story short, um, he ended up repenting. Um, he shut down the site. He shut down the business. He continued coming to church, continued serving faithfully. Um, since that time, he's thanked myself and the elder multiple times um, for being willing to approach him and have a difficult conversation. Now, that one went, I mean, ultimately the end result was as good as what we could hope for. But it did not feel like that's where it was going to go in the beginning. You know what I'm saying? And I know that is a weird thing, but I promise you, you guys, like you're probably had weirder conversations already with people, right? And you're going to continue to have those, whether it's a situation like that or it's a leadership conversation. And I just say, like, man, just keep having the hard conversations. Have someone to hold you accountable, a coach, your spouse, and say, okay, by this date, I'm going to have that conversation, because that's where you're going to see a lot of leadership growth and change happen. So anyway, I'll I'll end with that one, and and maybe we can just open it up if you've got a question about hard conversations or anything that right now is on your mind, leadership wise to church planning wise, that in the next 10 minutes maybe I could be a help with. I'd be glad to talk
I
about.
think it goes right back to kind of what I mean, I think you opened it up talking about the importance that coaching, leadership development is it's a relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that goes such a long way when you have to have those hard conversations. Like if there's a relationship behind it, it makes it go a lot easier. Because they
Yeah.
know you, you know them, you know their heart, they know your heart. And so when that confrontation comes, it's not coming from a bad place. It's coming from a place where this person has a relationship with me, and
Yeah.
and I think they receive that a lot better than like let's say, the guy you had to approach with the photography. If there was no relationship behind there, and all of a sudden this is the first conversation he's ever had with
Yeah.
senior pastor, lead pastor Stephen, then that the conversation is probably not going to go that well. Because because I've seen
By
the
the
flip
way.
side of that with the thing where our pastor had to have a conversation with someone. Unfortunately, that was the first conversation, and the person received it as, I've been a member for X amount of time. This is the first conversation we've ever had, and it's just to discipline me. Didn't even ask me what was going on in my. And so I think when there's a relationship behind it, those
Yeah.
those hard conversations, like you said, that are necessary, they go a lot better. They're received a lot better.
Yeah. Fortunately, I had known Amos a long time before he started that business. So
But it's funny, we had the exact same scenario about 2 years ago with a lady in our church.
yeah,
And she's like, "What? I'm a lady, and she's a lady. What was I'm taking pictures. This
it's
like,
whew, it was so weird. I
yeah,
can't even dive into how weird it was.
for sure. So scratch that off your list of ministries to start, Chris and Ashley.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to cancel the business license then. So I'll get those details from Amos on how to do that well.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a pro.
Well, look, hey, while we got Stephen on, let's take advantage of having him here. He's got experience as a church planner, as a multiplier, um, disciple maker. So, man, if you guys got anything, and it may not be directly related to the topic that he discussed, but definitely let's take advantage of having him here on this call. So just throw out whatever
I get
you.
a hard one. All right, Stephen. So since you guys are up to, I think, like 2,000 every Sunday, and no, you guys are growing, and it's really exciting to see since we've been able to watch it since the very beginning in California. And I guess the question I have is, as since we're talking about relational development, developing leaders through a relationship has a lot to do with it. What is something you've struggled with as your church has grown with being able to balance that you're not the only one who's building a relationship with people, but you still think it's important to do? You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a good question, because I feel like that's one of the things we're thinking through right now. And I've been feeling, because, uh, I am relational. And Chris, I know, like, I mean, you're like if I'm a 7 on that, you're like a 13 on that chart because I know you're super relational. And that's just part of how God's wired you, and that's fantastic. But yeah, there comes a point where it's like, I heard Chris Brown describe it as, you're like a Lego block, right, with connecting points on you, and some Lego blocks have more connecting points they can handle than others. But at some point, every Lego block, like you're like, that's as many relationship as I can really handle, right? And so I think right now what what I'm seeing happen more, um, and God's teaching me is seeing those relationships go beyond me and trusting leaders and spiritually mature people in those contexts. So like I will give you, for instance, there's some there's some women in our church that I may have had a conversation once or twice with. I don't really know them. And then so, I see them now getting involved in things and getting on a team, and, people are asking the, leadership questions, can they be? And so now I find myself in a role of like, I can't go, oh, I've seen them in action. I know that they're ready. I'm having to have kind of these coaching conversations through people and go, okay, I don't know her, but you do. And have you seen her? Tell me about her first of all. Okay. And then now then, can you, before you give her that role, because that one's hard to take away, can you give her a role where you're letting her lead something for 2 weeks? That's a small ask. And so that's kind of what I'm seeing now is I'm having conversations through other people, and I'm also having to trust their judgments, which feels really like I don't have control over it. The really cool part is I'm also getting to see like multiplication and the Holy Spirit produce fruit and and raise up leaders that I feel like I have nothing to do with. And that's pretty cool. And it's also a good reminder that the Lord's just telling me like, uh, I'll use you, but I don't have to have you. It goes far beyond you. So it's been I guess it's been difficult and also exciting at the same time to know that I don't have a relationship with some of those people that's close, but other people do. And we're seeing fruit from that. So maybe that answers the question, hopefully. No, sorry. I'll take another run at it.
Mm, Anybody else have anything for Stephen before we wrap up our time?
Tell us what's your next step.
Man, don't put me on the spot like that. Um, well, okay, I'll tell you two. I mean, the big one is we're trying to purchase a building. Hopefully this year, maybe early next year. And in Southern California, it's incredibly expensive. So it's been a long process of 5,000 steps, but that is our hopefully big next step. Um, and then kind of a smaller next step than that is what we're talking about. There's a newer guy to our church who's only been with us a few months, but sometimes I feel like for us, most of the time, the people that God sends us who walk in the doors of our church are not believers or they're baby believers, right? And that's fine. And we work with them, develop them. That's who we're called to reach. But every now and then you feel like God gives you like God give me somebody who knows Jesus, is healthy, and is willing to work, right? And we've got a newer couple like that in our church, and it's a guy who I'm he's got so much potential for leadership. And so I'm walking with him right now. And I'm trying to practice what I'm preaching in. I don't want to on-ramp him too fast, but I also don't want to on-ramp him too slow where he loses interest, if that makes sense, because he's a very capable leader. And so that's the next step that I'm walking through right now. So just doing that with him in ways of like, I'm giving him chances to give input, but not leadership yet. So he's even made some input on some service changes that we're making on Sunday because he's got really good insight into that. And we talked about it a couple months ago, and then we're making the changes on Sunday. And so he's had some like almost like I've given him a voice of consulting without giving him leadership yet. And so trying to walk that road with him. So I think that's our time, guys.
Awesome. Yeah, Stephen, thank you. I'm gonna stop recording now.